They thought you'd forget, didn't they? They thought time would wash away the scars, make you weak, make you one of them, another face in the crowd, another puppet with cut strings, another ghost drifting through life. Afraid of their own reflection, they were counting on it, counting on your silence, your surrender. They figured you'd let it slide, let it rot inside you like an infection you refused to treat. But you didn't forget. You never forget. You carry the weight of every knife they twisted in your back, every lie they fed you with a smile, every moment you were left bleeding while they laughed. And now it's time for payback. Let's get one thing straight. This isn't about childish revenge. Oh no. Revenge is what weak men crave when their egos are bruised. This is about justice, the kind of justice the world never hands out because it's too busy protecting the guilty, making excuses for them, patting them on the back while they trample over the ones who suffer in silence. They build their thrones out of your pain, sit there smugly as if they earned it, as if the world was always meant to be theirs. But what happens when the foundation starts to crack? When the one they counted on to stay down finally stands up? What happens when the forgotten refuse to stay forgotten? I'll tell you what happens. Chaos. Beautiful, unforgiving chaos. The kind that doesn't knock before it enters, doesn't ask for permission, doesn't care about rules written by cowards. The kind that makes them afraid for the first time in their lives. You see, the strong don't fear justice. They welcome it because they know they can handle it. It's the guilty who tremble when they hear footsteps in the dark. It's the liars who sweat when the truth comes. It's the backstabbers who start praying when they realize the person they buried isn't buried at all. But you already know that, don't you? You felt it, that slow burn in your gut. The quiet whisper in the back of your mind telling you it isn't over, not by a long shot. You wake up every day carrying the weight of what they did, feeling it pressed down on your chest like a stone that refuses to move. And yet, here you are, still breathing, still standing. They don't get it. They don't understand that suffering doesn't break people like you, it builds them. It sharpens them like a blade dragged across stone, turning them into something they can't control, can't predict, can't stop. Let me tell you a little secret. The worst thing they ever did wasn't betraying you. No, the worst thing they ever did was underestimate. They thought pain would destroy you, but all it did was carve you into something they'll never be able to face without trembling. The world teaches people like you that you have two options: forgive and forget, or become the monster they always accused you of being. But there's a third option, the one they don't want you to realize exists. You don't forgive, and you don't become a mindless beast. You remember, you learn, you rise, and when the time is right, you act. People like them, they survive on comfort. They need the world to stay predictable, to keep their hands clean while others drown in the mess they created. They talk about morals, about fairness, about how you should be the bigger person. Funny, isn't it? How the ones who hurt you the most are always the first to preach about peace when they realize the game is changing. They want you docile, weak, chained by your own conscience while they walk free. But tell me, where was their conscience when they tore you apart? Where was their guilt when you were screaming inside, wondering why no one cared? Number, they don't get to dictate the rules anymore. You do. But here's where most people mess up. They think justice is about lashing out, about screaming into the void, about making reckless moves just to prove they're alive. That's what fools do. You move smart. You let patience be your weapon. Let silence be your shield. You watch. You wait. You make sure every step you take is the right one or not, driven by blind rage, but by something sharper. You see, the best payback isn't loud. It doesn't announce itself with fireworks and bloodshed. The best payback is a whisper that turns into a storm, a presence they can't shake, a shadow that stretches over them no matter how much light they surround themselves with. And when that moment comes, when the weight of their own sins comes crashing down on them, when the walls they built with lies start to crumble, when they look over their shoulder and realize the one person they never wanted to see again is standing right there, that's when it all makes sense. That's when the real fun begins. So tell me, are you ready? Are you ready to make them remember? Because they thought you'd forget. Thought time would do their dirty work for them. Thought you'd fade into the background like a ghost with no voice, no fight left, no reason to exist beyond the pain they left you with. But ghosts don't disappear, do they? They haunt, they linger, and sometimes they come back stronger than anyone ever imagined. It's time to remind them. Time to show them exactly who they tried to bury. Because you never forgotten, neither will they. Because that's the part they never saw coming, the version of you that didn't break, that didn't crumble under the weight of their betrayal. They thought the pain would swallow you whole, that you'd stay frozen in time, a silent monument to their cruelty. But instead, the pain became your architect, chiseling away the softness, reforging you into something unrecognizable, something indestructible. And now they sense it. They don't even have to see you face to face to feel it, the shift in the air, the unyielding presence that lingers just out of reach. That's what eats at them, the not knowing. They thought they were the storm, but you became the thunder in the distance, the silence before the strike. They thought they owned the narrative, but the story was never theirs to tell. It was always yours. You see, people like them rely on control. They move through life believing they can manipulate the world to suit their needs, twisting reality until it bends under their will. But what happens when they realize there's something they can't control? When the person they discarded no longer dances to the tune they composed? That's when the fear sets in, the deep, gnawing fear that keeps them awake at night. Not because they regret what they did. No, they don't regret hurting you, they regret that it didn't break you. Because now, every time they hear your name, every time they catch a shadow that moves a little too quickly in their peripheral vision, they wonder. They wonder if today is the day the consequences finally catch up to them. They wonder if you're watching, if you're waiting, if you're smiling somewhere in the distance while their carefully constructed world starts to shake. But here's the truth. They aren't afraid of you. Not really. They're afraid of what you've become. They're afraid of the version of you they can no longer predict. The one who doesn't chase. The one who doesn't beg. The one who doesn't need their validation to feel whole. And that's the real power, isn't it? Not in screaming your vengeance from the rooftops. Not in showing them your pain like a badge of honor. No, the power lies in your silence, in your steady rise, in the unrelenting force of your growth. It's in the way you walk past them without a flicker of recognition, as if they've become nothing more than a footnote in your story, a barely remembered scar. Because they want to matter. They want to believe they still hold a piece of you, that their betrayal left a mark so deep you'll never heal. That's what people like them feed off of. The illusion of importance, the false comfort that they still own a fragment of your soul. But when you refuse to react, when you don't flinch at the sound of their voice, when you smile not out of malice but out of sheer indifference, that's when they truly start to fall apart. Because indifference is a weapon more lethal than any rage. And you've learned, haven't you? You've learned that the most dangerous person isn't the one screaming for revenge, it's the one who has already let go. The one who has nothing left to lose because they've already lost everything and survived. So you don't rush. You don't strike in blind fury. No, you move like smoke unseen, unavoidable. You build in silence, you grow in shadows. And when the time is right, when the weight of their own sins becomes unbearable, you step into the light not to punish them, but simply to show them that you've outgrown the grave they tried to bury you in. Because that's the cruelest form of justice, isn't it? Not giving them the satisfaction of knowing they still haunt you, not letting them believe they broke you, but rising so high, so untouchable, that their memory becomes irrelevant, a mere whisper in the wind. And one day, when they least expect it, they'll feel it. That slow, creeping horror. The realization that the person they tossed aside is no longer in their shadow but standing above them, watching as their carefully built walls start to crack under the weight of their own emptiness. That's the moment they'll understand this was never about revenge. It was about reclaiming your power. And now, it's yours. But power doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers. Sometimes it lingers in the quiet moments, in the way you move without announcing yourself, in the way you build a life so untouchable that their absence feels laughably small. They thought you'd crumble without them. They thought the silence they left behind would consume you. would gnaw at the edges of your sanity until you came crawling back, begging for a shred of their attention. But you didn't. You never did. Instead, you let the silence become your weapon. Because silence is louder than any scream, it's the sound of restraint, of someone who knows they don't need to shout to be heard. It's the sound of someone who doesn't need to explain themselves, someone who has already won simply by refusing to engage. And that's what terrifies them now. They want to believe you're still there, lurking in the ruins of the person they left behind. They want to think you're still breaking apart in the dark, replaying every word they said, every lie they whispered, every knife they twisted. They want to imagine you as a prisoner to the past, shackled to the version of yourself they thought they destroyed. But you're not. You're building something in the quiet. You're becoming something they can't touch. Because the truth is, they never expected you to rise. They expected you to react, to lash out, to scream your pain into the world like an open wound. They thought they could paint you as the villain, the unhinged one, the broken soul who couldn't let go. That's the game they play. They push and push until you break. And then they stand back and point at the wreckage saying, "See, look how crazy they are." But you didn't give them that. You gave them nothing. No reaction, no words, no satisfaction. And now that nothing is eating them alive. Because people like them don't fear anger, they fear irrelevance, they fear being forgotten. They fear that they were never as important as they believed. And that's exactly what you're giving them. You see, the most brutal form of justice isn't screaming in their faces, letting them realize they no longer have a face in your world at all. It's walking past them without a flicker of recognition, as if they're just another stranger on the street. It's thriving without a single glance in their direction. Because your success, your silence, that's the blade they never saw coming. And the best part, they will never understand it. They will never grasp how you took every scar they left and used it as a foundation for something greater. They will never comprehend how the pain they inflicted became the very thing that forged you into someone they could never break again. Because they live in a world where control is everything. Their power lies in your reaction, in your pain, in your desperate need to be seen, to be heard, to be understood. But the moment you stop needing their validation, the moment you stop chasing their acknowledgement, that's the moment you slip from their grasp entirely. And now they're left grasping at shadows. You've become a ghost knot, the kind they wanted, not the broken shell of a person they thought you'd be, but a ghost of their own making. An echo of the fear that maybe, just maybe, they never mattered as much as they believed. And that thought will follow them everywhere. It'll creep into their thoughts late at night, in the quiet moments when there's no one left to impress, no crowd to manipulate. It'll whisper in the back of their mind when they hear your name, a cold reminder that the person they tried to destroy didn't just survive. they thrived. That's the real punishment. Not rage, not violence, but existence. Your existence, bigger, stronger, untouchable. And while they spiral, still clinging to the idea that they once had power over you, you'll be moving forward calmly, steadily, without a backward glance. Because you know the truth now. The greatest form of payback isn't becoming what they feared, it's becoming something they never even considered possible. It's growing into a version of yourself so powerful, so unyielding, that they can't even comprehend it. And when they finally realize that they no longer hold a place in your story, that they've become a footnote in a life far beyond their reach, that's when the scales truly tip. Because in the end, the real reckoning doesn't come with a scream. It comes with a smiley, quiet, unbothered smile that says, I won. And they'll spend the rest of their lives wondering how they lost a battle they didn't even realize was being fought. Let's keep this rolling intense, unrelenting, and sharp as ever. Because that's the part they'll never escape living with, the knowledge that you didn't just survive their betrayal. You transcended it. They thought they'd broken you, thought they'd left you in pieces, too shattered to ever rebuild. But every time they close their eyes now, there's a whisper, a gnawing voice in the back of their head asking, what have they become without me? And that question will haunt them. Not because they care. Now they never cared about you, only about the power they once held over you. But now they're terrified of their own insignificance in your life. Because people like them, they feed off your pain. They need to believe they left a scar so deep that you'd never recover, that you'd stay bound to the wreckage they caused. It's how they validate themselves, by convincing themselves they were that important, that impactful. But the moment you stopped bleeding for them, that was the moment their power began to wither. Because there's nothing more devastating to someone who thrives on control than realizing they have none. And now they watch you risen not because you're trying to prove something to them, but because you've outgrown the very idea of their validation. Your growth isn't about them. Your strength doesn't orbit their betrayal. It's yours pure, untouchable, unstoppable. You don't check their social media. You don't ask about them. You don't replay the moments when they left you gasping for air, because those moments no longer define you. You've made peace with the past, but not in the way they expect. They think moving on means forgiving them, softening the edges, rewriting history so that their betrayal seems smaller, more excusable. They think healing means you'll eventually look back with a gentle smile and say, it wasn't so bad. But you know better. Healing doesn't mean pretending they didn't tear you apart. It means accepting that they did and refusing to let it chain you. It means looking at every scar and thinking, yes, this happened. Yes, it hurt. And no, it doesn't own me anymore. It means becoming the version of yourself that no longer needs the apology they never gave. Because the apology, it would have been meaningless. It wouldn't have erased the damage, wouldn't have rewound the clock. And deep down, You know they never would have apologized to heal you, only to ease their own guilt. That's what people like them do. They want closure, but not for you, for themselves. They want to hear you say, "I forgive you," so they can sleep better at night, so they can tell themselves they weren't really the villain, so they can twist the story into something that makes them look human. But you never gave them that, and that silence, that's what shatters them. Because now, every time they try to rewrite the story, there's a gaping hole, your absence. They can't spin a tale where they're the misunderstood hero because you're not there to validate it. They can't shape the narrative to make themselves look like the wounded soul who didn't mean to hurt you because you never played your part. And so the story unravels. All that's left is the truth, raw, unforgiving, undeniable. That they hurt you, that they betrayed you, that they walked away without looking back. And now, they're the ones left looking over their shoulder, wondering if the consequences are finally catching up. Because that's the other thing about people like them. They think consequences are a myth. They move through life believing they can break people without ever paying the price. They think the world will forget, that their actions will disappear into the void. But consequences don't knock, they break down the door. And you don't have to lift a finger. You don't have to scream for justice. You don't have to beg for the universe to punish them. Because the most brutal form of karma is this. They will spend the rest of their lives haunted by the person they could have never destroyed. Every time they see you thrive, every time your name comes up in conversation, every time they catch a glimpse of you moving through the world unbroke, that's the punishment. Not because you're doing it to them, but because you're doing it without them. They'll sit in the silence they once left you in and realize it doesn't feel so victorious anymore. Because now the silence isn't yours, it's theirs. The echo of their own emptiness. The quiet hum of a life that no longer includes you. And that, more than any scream, more than any act of vengeance, that silence will devour them from the inside out. Because you kept moving forward, not to prove a point, not to make them suffer, but because they were never the point at all. They were just a chapter, a bitter, painful chapter, but not the final one. And now you're writing something new. And that's what kills them the most, knowing they will never be a part of the story again. Because that's the cruelest truth of all, isn't it? That they aren't the villain in your story anymore. They're just a footnote, a forgotten name, a faded memory collecting dust in the corners of your mind. And that's what keeps them up at night. Because people like them, they don't just want to hurt you, they want to be remembered for it. They want their betrayal to be a landmark in your life, a permanent scar that you trace with shaking hands, a moment that defines you forever. But what happens when they realize they're not a scar, they're a shadow, a flicker of something that used to matter, but doesn't anymore? What happens when they understand that you didn't just move on, you moved up? You didn't stay frozen in the aftermath of their destruction. You didn't sit there in the rubble of what they did, waiting for them to come back with an apology or an explanation or some half-hearted excuse dressed up as remorse. Number, you rose. And that rise, that silent, steady rise burns them more than any words ever could. Because they thought they owned you. They thought their absence would hollow you out, that you'd spend your nights dissecting every cruel word they said, every betrayal they orchestrated, every way they twisted the knife. They thought they'd echo inside your head for the rest of your life. But now they realize the only echo is their own, because you stopped replaying the past. You stopped asking, why did they do this? Or was I not enough? You stopped begging the universe for answers to questions that never mattered. And when you stopped chasing those answers, you freed yourself from them. Now, the only person living in the past is them. Because here's the secret they never saw coming while they were so busy convincing themselves that they'd won, that they'd broken you. They never noticed you were already rebuilding. Not out of spite, not to show them what they lost, but because you realized something far more important. Your life was never about them. They were just a storm you endured, a lesson you learned, a test you survived. They were never the plot, they were a plot twist. And the story, the real story, it's still yours to write. And every day you wake up and choose yourself, choose your peace, your growth, your power. You pull yourself further and further from their grasp. They can't touch you anymore. Not because you fought back, but because you stopped fighting for them entirely. And that's what shatters them. Because when they finally realize they're no longer a chapter in your life, when they understand that the version of you they destroyed doesn't exist anymore, they'll be left standing in the ruins of a battle they thought they'd won, only to discover that you left the battlefield long ago. That's the moment their world tilts. Because the person they hurt, that person is gone. And the person you are, now the one who rose from the ascesis, untouchable. You don't flinch at their name. You don't burn at the memory of what they did. You don't hate them, not because you forgave them, but because they no longer deserve a single drop of your energy. Hate would be too much. Anger would be too much. Even pity would be too much. All you give them now is nothing. And that emptiness, that void where your pain used to be, that's what will devour them. Because they need to matter. They need to believe they were significant, that their betrayal marked you so deeply that you'd never escape it. But you did escape it. And now, they're the ones trapped in a story where you've already turned the page. Because that's what real revenge looks like, not a dramatic confrontation, not some fiery speech, not fists thrown in a final explosive battle. Real revenge is evolution. Real revenge is becoming so whole, so unbreakable, that their existence becomes irrelevant. It's watching them stare at you, searching for the person they once controlled, and seeing the panic bloom in their eyes when they realize that person is gone. It's walking past them, not with a smirk, not with rage, but with indifference. Because nothing terrifies a manipulator more than realizing they no longer have power over you. They don't get to claim your pain. They don't get to wear your scars like trophies. They don't get to be the villain in your story because the story has outgrown them. And that's the punishment. Not the storm they thought would come, not the war they expected you to wage, but the silence, the distance, the unshakable truth that they no longer have a place in your world. And as they watch you rise steadily, quietly, without ever looking back, they'll realize the most devastating truth of all. They didn't break you. They built you. And now they'll have to live every day knowing that the fire they tried to destroy you with only made you burn brighter.